I'm Mark Gagan and you're listening to the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go. Release your underwriters to underwrite with Advantage Go's underwriting platform. I have the best job in the world. That is, it's the best job for someone like me who really likes talking to people and finding out what they're doing and thinking, but also as a byproduct, finding out what they're really like. The reason I'm saying this is because today's episode was so much fun to make that it didn't feel like a standard day at the office. I've had Warren Downey and Lee Anderson of London-headquartered intermediary specialist Risk Group on the show before, and really enjoyed their company, good humour, and the openness and ease with which they could discuss their strategy and business philosophy. But the interview you're about to hear is exceptional. This is because rarely do I interview two senior executives who finish off each other's sentences and enjoy each other's company so much. The trigger for our podcast was a change of investors that has brought blue-chip players Warburg Pincus and Temasek into the fold at a reported valuation of over £1 billion. So perhaps that's why the conversation was so animated. Whatever the reason, what follows is a very enjoyable romp outlining the strategy and culture of an incredibly successful broking duo. What is SRG going to do with its new investment? The answers are all here, and that's because of the two people in the room with me. A minute ago, I said I have the best job in the world for me. It seems obvious to me that these two would say exactly the same about their jobs. Warren's the first to speak. Enjoy the podcast. Warren and Lee, welcome back to the Voice of Insurance.
We're back.
Great to see you again.
Sometimes you don't really need an excuse to get someone back on the show, but this time you definitely don't, because we've got something very specific I want to talk about, because you've done a big deal, or a big deal has been done to you. Perhaps,
you noticed that, did you?
Oh, we did. I was reading about that. And,
Yes.
and I thought, well, we really need to get you back on the show to talk about this. So Warburg, Pincus, Temasek.
Yes.
That's a big deal, and some very big numbers bandied around.
Allegedly.
Well, over £1 billion.
That's what they assure us. It's over £1 billion. Amazing. Yeah, we've been through that sort of process once before, because when we started together, it was September 19. So we're nearly 5 years old.
Do you get better at it the second time?
I think we were better at it.
I think we did get better.
We knew people. Actually, do you know what it was?
That's the difference.
The biggest thing was our investor was Pollen Street Capital when we started, and they'd had the assets before we arrived. So we weren't really part of the original package. So we came in a bit later on. And in pandemic time, they had to do an exit. So we were a year and a bit in when we sold. So firstly, it was very, very early. So we hadn't got all of our ducks in a row. And also, we didn't really know that community of investors. We knew Pollen Street, and that was kind of it. So, and I think we thought we had a bit longer to get to know people. And it happened very quickly. So this time, we're 3 years and a bit in. And the antidote to that was to make sure that didn't happen again by getting to know a few people along the way. So we arrived at this process with a little bit more network, which was really important.
Very often for many people, it's very different being technically acquired or receiving new investment, new capital, than being the one being acquired.
It is.
Yeah, so you're right. We get both sides of the equation, don't we, often? Now, we do like to think of it obviously as being invested in as opposed to being acquired, because
it's difficult. Certainly when you see the headlines, you say XYZ broker up for sale, and you know it's not really up for sale. It's just it's going to be swapping out this investor for that investor.
Exactly.
Once in a blue moon, that'll be a factually correct statement that somebody's been absorbed and disappeared. But we say we're in chapter 2 of quite a long book. And we just started chapter 2. We say we start chapter 2 in January. And we had a couple of investors in chapter 1, and we'll probably have a few more in chapter 2. So it's going to be a...
Kill off some main characters in chapter 3.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, there's going to be a scandal in chapter 4.
I sincerely hope not.
You can come back and record about it.
It's more like a promotion story. Let's say it's like a football team getting promotion into a new league.
I think that's
You're
right.
knocking on the door of the Premier League now?
What a good way to put it. If you take the people we compete with, I mean, we are in the top 20 in the UK. If you take out those people with whom we have no business, like small online businesses or... So I suppose in that sense, there's 20 teams in the Premier League. So we could, at a stretch, I suppose we could say that. But I think it's not so much that we're in the Premier League, but our investors are definitely Premier League investors.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I would certainly say that. I think that's fair.
Should I've said that, not that first bit?
I think that's a very fair statement. Well, I suppose, then by association, that makes you Premier League, doesn't it?
Like, what's that team in Wales that have got the Hollywood actors?
Ryan
Reynolds. His lot. So they've got rock star investors and they're on the way through the leagues. Maybe we're that.
Can I be Ryan Reynolds, though? Because I look more like him.
Well, yeah, I can be the Roy Mackle, what's-his-face, because no one knows who he is. That would be me.
Sold.
What's really changing then, other than you could say that you're going up a league and you're going into a new division with some more blue chip investors than the ones you had before? What does it actually change?
You know this from when we spoke before. I think when we gave ourselves our little scorecard as to how we have done in our previous chapters, if you like, there were things that we thought we'd have developed a bit more than we had done at that point in time. And I think this particular chapter, I think we are quite quickly going to sort of write those pages. There's going to be things that we do which are completely consistent and authentic with what everyone has got to know us for doing, but they will be in new areas, including, international is one of the things we spoke about previously. I think you know this, Mark, you'd have seen it over the years that many people can have little forays into territories that can penalise them, not being close to it, not having the right scale. So for us, it's always been, when we do it, it's got to be with the right investors, with the right firepower, with the right platform, as well as the right people and culture and all that kind of stuff. So I think we've got that combination now. We've got the scale, we've got the Premier League investors, as you say. And obviously there's a bit more cash around. Warren can afford to buy a new suit now, which would be really good.
One that fits my extra 7 kilos I put on since I met you.
I was thinking, well, you've only got little legs, so you don't need much material.
I come here mainly for the abuse. The one thing I would say to the nuance is that even though we are going to do those things that we had not yet fully executed, they were always in plan. So in many ways, what we're doing is going to execute the plan. In fact, we sometimes say we've only had one plan.
Yeah.
And we stood up I think most of our insurer mates were kind enough to turn up in January 2020 to hear what this thing was that got a fancy name, but and we said we wanted to be in the top 20 in 5 years, and we said a few other things, but basically it was this culture-driven specialty business that could be of sufficient scale and meaning in the market to matter, and we're still doing that. This is about, do we do slightly bigger things, do we do a bit more international things, but I don't think we'll do fundamentally different things.
You've got more firepower, so should we expect them to be bigger things?
Yeah, I would say so.
I think that's right.
You can only do the things that you can do, and timing and all those things being everything. But I would say over the span of this next 5 years, I would say that on average, you probably see us do slightly bigger things.
And is 5 years the sort of time frame that this investment is like to be looking to be around for?
What I would say is that we did a retrospective in December for our own gang that was from when Lee and I started in the firm, which was September 19, through to December, just gone. While we were going through it, and we were thinking this idea of the storyline of the business, and we decided that was chapter 1. So the second half of the internal presentation was chapter 2, and that took us from January this year to 2030. And that's kind of what I mean by not adapting the plan necessarily just because of the change of investor. We've got an overarching plan. It is the plan that we've discussed with Warburg Pincus and Temasek. And it's that plan that we're going to try and execute. So they might be there at the end of it. They might not be. Somebody else might be there. But our plan is still the plan.
You've said international. Is that the big opportunity?
Yeah, I think so. Again, as Lee alluded to, we still look in the mirror and are surprised in ourselves that we're not more international. And I think what we said last time still remains very true, that we underestimated the opportunity in our backyard. That is the truth. And therefore, you focus in on those things that are nearest and easiest and most straightforward to execute.
We often talk about it. It's not a religion. And at our heart, we are good old corporate boys. That's our background. And that sort of environment for people that haven't worked in that environment is that you're always having to prioritise. Your list is never done.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that in some of our activities over the recent period, when there were opportunities to do some things overseas, there was always something on our back doorstep that were easier, more proximate, more in our sweet spot.
We may have been advantaged had an
advantage position to acquire, and you mustn't let vanity overtake practical, pragmatic investment decisions.
Sorry to interrupt in mid-flow, but this is just a reminder that you could be advertising right here, right now, and getting your message directly into the ear of key decision makers in the insurance industry. And you'll be doing it while they're absolutely in listening mode. The podcast is the medium of the future, and so is audio advertising. Contact me on mark@thevoiceofinsurance.com, and I'll do everything I can to get you started. And I suppose the bigger you are in your home territory, the better in many ways, surely, because it's going to give you that scale.
Yeah,
that's right.
Scale is your sort of potential enemy of culture. So you've got to work really hard to maintain this differentiated people and culture-oriented business. But it is the friend of taking risks. And doing things far away from home is taking a risk. And so that risk is now proportionate to our relative scale. And we sometimes say a risk we would take today in terms of doing something creative, new, bold, or far away is now a proportionate risk. It wouldn't have been something we'd have done in 2019.
But you echoing your earlier point, it's proportionate in the same way that when we decided to build an underwriting business, it would be proportionate to the overall.
That's right.
When we started to move away from being a predominantly wholesale business into a more profound UK retail business, that had to be proportionate.
Yeah.
So I think
it does matter.
It kind of matters.
That's right. You will not find that at any point in our next couple of chapters that we've suddenly that our MGA is the thing and everything else is a tack onto the side, because we're trying to build this sort of multi-legged stool and we want them things proportionate to each other. And at the moment, our international business is disproportionately small, and therefore we're going to get onto that.
You talk about distance being the enemy of culture. Often when people talk, sitting in London, they talk about going international. What they mean is actually going around the old Commonwealth plus the English-speaking peoples, as Winston Churchill would describe them. Yeah. Is your ambition greater than that?
We're looking east, it's fair to say. We said to somebody the other day, east of East London, which I quite like. So Europe and Asia, we don't have a particular passion for entering the US. We think that there are specialisms that we are active in and want to be active in that have international relevance, and we'd like to follow those specialisms where they take us. And some of those will take us into North America. But in terms of being a business of scale, that's not on the agenda.
It's one thing where I don't think scale leads to the inevitable conclusion that you must be in the States. That's where I think, as a statement, I don't think it's an inevitable consequence of
Certainly
scale.
Not at our scale.
Exactly. Quite.
No.
Having lived and worked and run insurance businesses in Europe and Asia, there aren't many Scandinavian businesses thinking, oh my goodness, I better get hold of a business in the US. That's a market in its own right, with its own disciplines, its own opportunities, its own dynamics. Same in Asia. No Vietnamese or Malaysian brokers saying, when are we going to open in New York? That's a burgeoning market with low penetration, lots of interesting risk dynamics. So we want to be in these places in Europe and Asia, the right business for that territory.
So we're penciling you down for Sweden, Malaysia and Vietnam.
I wish I'd picked better ones. those are lovely ones for all my Swedish listeners. Hey, buddy. But we definitely want to be in, I'd have said probably Vietnam, the Andaman Islands and Madagascar, I think would be the first three international operations.
All great holiday destinations.
Well, I suppose more seriously, where in those territories, this is half of the 2/3 of the land mass of the world, I think we're talking about. So where are we?
I think if we told you that, it would make it harder to do. So what we would say
is
that...
that's going to put the price up of any potential seller if they knew you were coming, yes.
I think the point is...
We like to surprise people.
Yeah, as you know, because we do most things bilaterally, we like most things to be a surprise as when they happen. So we try not to give too much away.
Well, what we should probably say is that in Europe and Asia, boldly saying that the UK and Ireland are somehow different to Europe, we will be physically present in Europe and Asia this year.
Yep.
But we will pick our places, our specialisms, and our style of entry appropriate to each market.
But you're right. Historically, the style was you go overseas in order to secure placement into London. That is a very old-fashioned mindset.
That is not us at all.
That is not what we're trying to do.
No, I was going to ask you about that because, yes, I've worked at an outpost in Madrid and it was very much sort of, well, what are you sending to London?
And there is still, that dynamic exists. It tends to exist much more in the very large, very complex. And we have been, to date, a friend of the mid-cap company. Yeah. So it's less true for us than it might be for a global energy business. But I remember arriving in Singapore in 2015, and I'm going to say a little bit more than 50% of all premium flows into our specialty hub in Asia went on to London. And I left in the summer of 2019, and at that point it was about 15%. So to us, if you're going to build a business in some of these places, you build a local business for local opportunity in local market.
And presumably you'd grown that business.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. So, proportionally, it was a big change.
And that culture is about serving those clients where they are.
Yeah. And being involved in specialisms that are relevant to that market. There are places in the world where we would be very active as a marine broker, for example, and we're not active as a marine broker today in London. Mm-hmm. So it's about being relevant and being local. We're not trying to be overlords from London.
And what has been nice, we talk about our culture a lot, as you know, but in our travels, we've met companies who are SRG in their territories. Yeah. It's very, very, very consistent. It's very, very recognisable.
It's like looking in the mirror sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Better looking.
It sounds like your modus operandi You go out and meet as many people as you can, and then you find people who are a bit like yourselves.
Yeah.
And then you probably both recognise that you would be a natural home
And I think
together.
I think that's absolutely right. I think what's probably also more prevalent now is that because we're a bit more well known, that a lot of people come and find us as well. So
Well, I suppose if they know that you've got,
Yes.
they've just read in the
Quite.
newspaper that Warburg Pincus and Temasek have just helped fund you for the next few years, then they probably will pick up the phone.
Yes. But I think since we last spoke, we also acquired CBC in December. And CBC was very much that sort of typical how we like to do business, which is getting alongside a people and culture driven business that when we looked at each other, we thought we would be able to describe this to all of our people as a fantastic move. And then the rest was detail. And we think about that same internationally, is you can sit in a room with a broking firm in another country and you can describe what they're doing and you say, I wouldn't do it like that. We don't quite operate like that. And therefore, we're not just going to be investing because we can. We're looking for the arc of culture and that arc of specialism.
And what about that risk, those cultural risks of you misunderstanding each other?
Yeah.
So you have international experience, though.
I think there is a fundamental difference between having a go and having lived, worked and run businesses in other parts of the world. Because I think a large part of our thinking about the growth of the group in the next 3 or 4 years could actually be done right here at home in London and in the UK. Mm-hmm. Large parts of it. So for us, international has to make sense in the context of that opportunity. When we're attracting people who have also done more international business. So our connectivity is increasing, our relationship network is broadening. And, there are certain territories where we're extremely well connected and there are others where we need to make some new friends.
How much do you think, if you acquire lots of international businesses, how much will you be sort of trying to export your culture to them? And how much do you think their culture might change you as a group?
I think proportionality is an important part. I think if we were going to do a sort of reverse takeover of something quite large, that becomes a much bigger question. I think while we're the acquirer and perhaps the dominant proportion, then it tends to be a little bit more, how can we capture the best of your culture as we expand this SRG thing? But if you think about the ingredients to our culture, if somebody's offended by the culture that we are seeking to set out here, we definitely aren't going to be doing business with them. Because our culture is to recruit excellent young people, to have one of the best training programs in the market, to have a great high potential leadership program, to give people equity in the company, strong sense of ownership. If you don't fancy those bits, you're not for us anyway. We're not a command and control culture, so we wouldn't fit well with one of those. We're not trying to narrow the universe, but we're just trying to find good people.
Why don't you give us a bit of an update since we last spoke, sort of where you are in terms of size? Because it was just under a year ago. You moved quite fast, obviously, especially some of it's inorganic.
Yeah. I mean, roughly we're 650 odd people, just on 650 people. About a third of those sit in our retail business in its entirety. We put about £1 billion of premium into the market, UK, quoting sterling here for everyone listening. And broadly, I mean, it shifts every time we acquire something, but broadly, from a revenue perspective, 40% retail, 20% underwriting, 20% wholesale, and
20% international.
20% international wholesale. So that's where it is today.
Because you're saying that the international part of that still should be bigger.
If your UK retail business is 40% and your rest of the world business is half that size, then it's plenty to go. It's more about the size of the universe.
Yes.
We're not looking at anything that's a bit small. We're saying there's a lot of opportunity there.
One thing about Warburg and Temasek is that they're involved in all sorts of insurance ventures around the world. Would that mean there might be some collaboration, that kind of thing, coming out of this, being you're part of a network?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I think it's much more of an investor-style relationship rather than a...
It's just, you're not seeing it as as an opportunity.
Not really.
I mean, that's not the reason for doing the deal.
I think their scale, their presence, their brand, their connectivity will do nothing but help. But it's not that which is the purpose of being part.
Yeah, I'm sure a business like Temasek probably owns stakes in a lot of very nice clients that you would like to talk to.
But my experience in those things is you've got to go and win those clients. But maybe you'll get a shot at it.
A warm intro.
Maybe you'll get a warm intro, yeah. But I would say that Temasek in particular, who would be less familiar as a name, I guess, to most people than Warburg Pincus, but have a 300 billion under management and are absolutely enormous and the second largest investor through private equity in the world. Their connectivity and their reach is astounding. And Warburg themselves is an experienced insurance investor. We're not going to suffer from their networks or their knowledge of our industry or business, but I wouldn't say we're joining a network of some kind.
The rationale was because you're a good investment. They think they're going to make some money and they're going to help you make some money too. What about I was just looking around the room, and three of us have quite grey beards. But Lee's is slightly more, so it's got a bit of red still, which is good. But we seem to be, Warren and I, I'm almost 100% grey now. So what about in your own personal ambitions? Would this be your last big deal?
Oh, gosh, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I
mean, you never know. You never know.
But you can't predict. I mean, I think what's getting a bit irritating is that we are not the youngest guys anymore. And we used to be. For a little while there was this sort of mid to late 40s kind of cool thing going on. Now we're just old farts like everybody else. So we're both 51. But if we were Americans, we'd have 30 years to go, wouldn't we?
Yes, that's true.
But we're not. So maybe it's only 20. We are enjoying it. That is the truth. And, you know, when you're enjoying something, it's hard to see it. It'd be a loss to not do it. And at 51... when we're in chapter 2, there's a long way to go. There's a lot to go for. Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot to go for. I think we'll be here for the next
It's a long time before you're non-executive chairman.
Oh, God, yeah.
That kind of thing.
We wouldn't be any good at that anyway.
God, no,
we'd be poking our nose in and telling people what to do.
So you'd be told to get lost by the young, exciting CEO you've hired.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would ruin my whole self-image that I am that young guy.
You always said that you want to get to a stage where you can just sit at home on LinkedIn and say all the things that you can't say publicly when you're employed.
That's right.
Just be that man.
Yeah, when somebody puts some sort of weird announcement out and you want to go, that's rubbish, that's not true. I want to be that old grumpy old
man. The amount of times we self-censor doing that, actually, when you write them and just never quite say that.
Yeah.
Well, I sincerely hope this little part of our exchange sees the light of day, but we shall see. We shall see.
This is chapter 2. We are humble enough to say we are somewhat surprised that things are where they are, in the sense that we have executed our plan as laid out. That's absolutely what we've done. We've done the things we believe in and we put them at the front, and we've found other people that would like to join in and be part of something. And we're also in the right industry at the right time in the investment cycle. And here we are sitting having a business with a seemingly quite large market cap, but we still feel we're at the beginning of the journey.
And in terms of that, I was going to ask you about international. You look at the US market, you look at the UK market and say, out of all the global markets for distribution, they are the most consolidated. But what seems to always amaze me is that there seems to always be a little bit more room for more consolidation than you had thought. I felt, certainly in my own career, that by the late 90s, sort of everything had been consolidated beyond possibilities, and it turned out that was absolutely not the case.
That's right.
Do you think there's still plenty of opportunities in home markets?
Yeah, completely. I mean, we have a little wry smile sometimes when people talk about the fact there's a lack of investment opportunity, and we genuinely don't see that at all. We are going to be very busy, certainly in the first sort of 24 months from here on in things that we're developing. It's where you find them, and it's where you look, and it's the natural full-on steps that you make, I think, that interests us. We always talk about not wanting to just own things. That's not the model, that's not fun. It's what do you do with those, and it can take you in some quite interesting areas. What is an issue, I guess, for the UK market, and some are trying to help alleviate it, is the fact that there aren't as many new businesses starting up. And there are some very good franchise models and very good startup support models that are trying to address that, and many of those are very successful.
We wouldn't mind doing that, would we? We wouldn't mind doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got an itch I haven't scratched about...
We can get a cream for that, though. I'm talking about the network.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I think there's something in, for all of us, you get to a point where you do owe it to try and help give something back and to build back in the industry. We've got some thoughts about that.
It's that entrepreneurial incentive that you wanted to help really incentivize. And I suppose we always talk about M&A, but actually, of course, how much of this new investment is really going to help really re-incentivize some of your up-and-coming people?
Yeah, no, I think M&A is a game we've kind of learned, isn't it, over the last 5 years. I wouldn't say we've mastered it, but I'd say we've learned it. And we've learned that you can't beat organic growth. The main lesson about M&A is, and it's not the main thing. And the other lesson about M&A is he who writes the biggest check wins. So therefore, you can be a winner if you think writing the biggest check is winning. So our position has always been to try and look for business that we're attracted to be in conversations that other people aren't in. So if you look at the fact we've done 19 transactions since we started in September 19, that's easy to remember. Next week it won't be. But if you look at those, 13 of those were bilateral, so there's nobody else involved in the conversation about the future ownership. And that's why we smirk at the universe issue, because people are talking about the fact that there are 1,000 less brokers than they were on X date. And we bought 19, 4 of which people didn't know existed, 4 of which people didn't know would ever sell, and 4 of which we actually competed with somebody else to get hold of them. So we think about the old MBA question. Well, how big is the universe? How much of it can you address? How will you address it? Through which means we start at the bottom. We say, what kind of businesses would be a great addition to this platform at this time, and let's go and get those.
Certainly one of the great joys of doing this podcast for me is obviously seeking out seasoned executives like yourselves, but also having that privilege also to meet people who are doing something new.
Yeah.
And I think we've been quite lucky in London recently. I'm actually, when we finish this, I'm going off to some drinks at the Lloyd's Lab alumni, which will be really interesting. Again, because I've probably interviewed quite a lot of them. Again, that innovation, certainly on the underwriting side, we've been seeing a huge amount of it. Again, you're in a lot of very specialist, very interesting things that are naturally innovative. Again, some of that Temasek and Wilbur Pincus money, has it got a big pot saying the word innovation on it? Or how do you go about it?
No,
do you do it a slightly different way?
We do it a slightly different way, which I think we may have touched on before. But when you talk about, are we here for the next deal and all that kind of stuff, part of that is, are you enjoying what you do? And you're right, we get to meet incredible people in all walks of life, some of which lead to potential M&A conversations, some of which may lead to conversations in the future. But a lot of it is gathering ideas. And as we say, it's not a religion. If we can learn something that someone else does better than we do it ourselves, we're not arrogant enough to suggest that we can't try and learn and impose as ourselves. So I think because we've always said the same central structure, which is it's the specialism focus, which is the important thing. It's not the distribution. Actually, it's not the geography. I think that's probably the same with the innovation tech piece. Because something's flashy and glossy, it doesn't mean it's the next investment for us. The specialism, I think, will still have to override any investments.
For example, I've had carbon credits, things that I think, goodness me, that is quite interesting. And when someone says, could that be the next cyber? You think, well, actually, yes, that probably could. I mean, who knows what the final numbers would end up being.
Yeah, I mean, we have live projects looking at things like that that are interesting, innovative, different, groundbreaking. They don't pay the bills. They might do one day, but they don't do today. And our view has been that, especially if you've tended to work one segment up from the very smaller customers, which we tend to do, we have a little bit of smaller, but we tend to be in that play. I mean, if you were distributing to the mass market, you would have an innovation hub, lab, whatever you want to call it, and you'd be finding out entirely new and innovative ways of getting to market and taking all the frictional cost out of it. Ours is still a people-oriented advice business. So we want to be slick, we want to be efficient, we want to run projects that lead us to interesting innovations, particularly around coverage and product and specialism, but we're not a tech business.
No, I'm coming at it much more from are there any new products out there that you think are exciting? And again, I suppose you're not a venture capital firm yourself, but do you agree that you have to put seeds in different pots? And they would say they don't pay the bills today, but they could be the oak trees of tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you put it back in the previous conversation, is that as Warren said, we've always got 5 or 6 of those types of projects, and they're always proportionate in terms of time and investment to the scale of the company at the time. Yeah. So we flex the time and money that we make available to them, depending upon where we are at any one point in time. So at the moment, we've probably got a lot more of that than we would have had historically.
Yes, that's fair.
But we've always had a sector of, okay, let's have a look, let's have a try. Let's have a play. Let's spend some money. Let's do some research.
I mean, I would say that, some of our innovation, as opposed to, as you said, not so much digital, is we've done something fairly innovative in our MGA that was announced in the last couple of weeks, which is where we've gone from that. We acquired a number of MGAs. We hired a bunch of people that were specialists in their areas. And each one of those offerings has its own placement dynamic, capacity, arrangement, renewal date, quarterly review meetings. And we wanted to combine the best parts of that with having an overarching capacity solution. And so we've done that. We've announced that we've done a partnership with Accredited that allows us to do twice as much business as we currently do. It takes out annual renewal, so it runs for 3 years at a time. And part of our business is being an MGA. It's a better, smarter way of engaging with your capacity providers. So for us, that's a much closer to hand, executable innovation, if you like, and is done.
Again, you're part of that story. This has been a big trend of the last 4 or 5 years. The hybrid capacity, longer term capital backing MGAs like yourselves. Something's going to stick around, and obviously you've bought into it.
I think if you look in every business segment for what's your greatest opportunity and what's your biggest pain. And the biggest pain of being an MGA is constant annual renewal of capacity and concern about.
It is crazy. You wouldn't, I mean, a balance sheet insurance company never has to think about that.
No. They'll be there the following year and they'll write that business again. So you try to capture opportunity and address pain. And that's probably why that trend is there to stay.
Well, I think we've spoken about everything that was on the list of piece of paper I've got in front of me that I brought with me. And we've added a couple of extra things that I'd forgot to put on the piece of paper. We haven't spoken about the market itself, but the market is the market. It's a good market, isn't it?
There's going to be some things in this second chapter that are not directly related to change of investors and depth of pockets and brand and reputation, but you've got to decide, a bit like our people and culture focus, followed by specialism and then neutral and everything else. You've got to decide what you want to be. And I think in this next chapter, one thing we're particularly excited about is we've got a really big project on around social mobility.
Yes.
And I think that we've reached the scale now where it won't be far away until we've had 50 of our people go through our program for developing new leaders and training them in a sort of almost a mini MBA in how to run a business and how to understand what that means and lead. And we're very proud of that. And I think if you were to ask us again in 3 or 4 years' time, I think we'd look back and say perhaps an equal number of people have joined us through some really deliberate activity in social mobility, people that would have no natural access point to our industry, finding routes because we do it deliberately, and partnering with charities. We've done a partnership. We've had 12 people in very recently.
Yeah, we started last year. We started sort of doing mentoring and.
Because you had your sort of shadow board as well.
Oh yeah, we still have that. Yeah, but this is more actually a physical partnership.
But specifically trying to bring in people.
Correct
new talent.
Look, we love this industry. This industry is great. If you sat here and you pointed out some of the things that were less great, perhaps you could say that throughout the years, nepotism has been particularly great in this industry. You know, people join.
Well, I wouldn't call it nepotism. I'd just say that it was a well-kept secret, and therefore your mum and dad could tell you about it because they worked in it, and so it looks like nepotism is not necessarily true.
Well, there is that. That is true. But there's also
they're the only ones who knew about it because they luckily had a relative who worked in insurance.
That is true. But you also have corporate graduate schemes where only
a lot of people have the same
sons and daughters of
surname as
clients.
the CEO,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. So we've gone the other way. We just said, how do we find the way to cut through all the noise and get directly to the people who would otherwise never hear about it, and not even hear about it, have an access point. So we've supported for quite a while. As Warren said, we've just had 12 people come through and spend a week with us across all our businesses, and it's going to develop into something quite real and quite renewable and recurring. And frankly, we're at a point where it's also incredibly life affirming to work with people who are genuinely enthused and excited to hear about something that we've made a career out of.
And they're fantastic people, so smart. We should have people from these much more varied backgrounds in the industry.
And it's just good for business, right?
It's great for business, great for creativity and thought. And we're not going to have a graduate scheme because we'd rather do this.
Yeah, quite
fantastic. Well, you've graduated to your next level, and I'm sure we'll be back. We'll be back talking about whatever sometime in the reasonably near future. So thank you so much.
Stuff. Thanks, Mark. Good to see you again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this programme. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. The Voice of Insurance is produced in association with Advantage Go. Release your underwriters to underwrite with Advantage Go's underwriting platform. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.